All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Tim DeWaard. I am with Arctic Wolf, and we are going to talk about, obviously, cybersecurity. So the title of the presentation is 2 Simple Ways to Dramatically Improve Your Security Posture and Improve Your Insurability. I realize I left a word off of there, which is cyber insurance insurability, just to be perfectly clear on what that means. I assume you all know what that means, but just in case, I want to call that out. So that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about 2 simple ways. Now, I don't want you to necessarily confuse 2 simple ways with 2 easy ways. We're going to talk about simple things in concept that are really, really difficult to do in practice. Let me give you an illustration. Diet and exercise. Has anyone ever tried diet and exercise? In concept, it's really simple. If you're trying to lose weight, it's essentially you're expending more calories than you're actually consuming. It is really hard to do in practice. Right? So that's what I mean by simple in concept, but difficult to do, but at the same time, extremely important, and we'll go through some of those examples here in a little bit. And I'll dive into some very specific examples within those 2 categories, and then what you can do about it to actually improve your security posture and your insurability, because they are related. Now, on the topic of cyber insurance, insurability, actually, quick raise of hands, whose organization has cyber insurance? All right, quite a few, if not the majority of you, okay? You want to know the simplest way to either keep your insurance or to keep your premiums in check? Again, it's really simple. It's very hard to do. Don't get breached. Don't get breached. I talk to a lot of brokers, I talk to a lot of carriers, and they basically say, don't get breached, and you'll stay insurable, and your rates will stay in check. Again, really, really simple concept, really difficult to do in practice, but that is part of what we're going to talk about here today over the next 43 minutes now. Okay, so here's the agenda. We're talking a little bit about cyber insurance. We're going to talk about breaches and incident response. And I'm going to give you some very specific examples, real world examples summarized in terms of what we see when it comes to breaches and incident response. And then most importantly, what do we do about it, right? Now, the other thing I want to mention here is in the world of cybersecurity, there are probably 5,000 things that you could or should be doing to protect your organization and your business. When I have conversations with customers, a lot of times they're simply overwhelmed. We don't know where to start. We don't know what to do next. There's so many things to do. We need help. And so we're going to focus in on 2 categories of things that are responsible for the majority of breaches. And so what I want you to walk away with is 2 concepts or 2 ideas on things that you can go work on that will give you the absolute biggest return when it comes to your time and resource investment, okay? All right, first of all, we have to do a little dose of reality. This is really interesting to me anyway, and that is, I want you to focus on the bottom right-hand side of this slide. $170 billion have been spent on cybersecurity. There are over 3,000 companies that do or claim to do cybersecurity. Year-over-year spending from 2022 to 2023 went up by 11%. That all sounds like good stuff, right? However, look at the top right. Despite that investment, cybercrime losses have increased by 48%. What's wrong? We're going to talk a little bit about what's wrong here in this presentation. But what is wrong? We're investing more and more, and yet our return is less and less. There is something we refer to as the effectiveness gap, and we're going to talk about what that gap consists of. We're not going to solve it all today. I wish it were that simple that we could solve it in a 40-minute talk. The reality is we can't, but we do need to talk about what is effective and what is ineffective, okay? So along that lines, let's talk about the first thing we also need to recognize is what are the different types of risk that exists, right? There's business risk, there's operational risk, there's risk mitigation. What most people do is they focus on the technological. So when you look at that $170 billion that's been spent, the vast majority of it has been spent on technology. Let's go get a tool. Let's get a firewall. Let's get a password manager. Let's get some network encryption. Let's go buy a thing and let's put it in place and hopefully that solves our problem. Now, those are important things and I'm not condemning those things. They are critically important, but they by themselves, if that's all we depend on and rely on, that continues to widen that gap, right? A lot of the issue that we see in the industry in terms of where breaches are actually happening, the right tooling was in place and they still got breached. There was signal that was indicating that they were getting breached and they still got breached. Why is that? We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So there's been an overemphasis and an over-rotation on technology. Again, not to minimize that. Technology is incredibly important. It has to be in place. But there needs to be, I'll shortcut it for you, there needs to be people in process. If that technology is not implemented well, think of your house. If you put a lock on your front door, but you don't actually lock it, that's people in process. The lock itself is the tool. The people in process have to be there to make sure that lock actually gets turned and to make sure that lock gets installed on the door properly as well, right? So if you're just relying on technology, the bigger piece and the biggest gap that we see when it comes to that effectiveness gap is really talent. The vast majority of customers out there just simply don't have enough talent or access to talent, whether that's on staff, whether that's the funds to go out and hire the right people. It is really, really expensive, but it's one of the biggest missing pieces. We're going to talk about how to fill that gap here in a little bit. And then there are things outside of like IT mitigation and technological mitigation that is simply business risk, right? Unless you shut everything down in your business and go back to paper, there's always going to be an element of risk. And the way that that risk is dealt with today, and should, quite frankly, properly be dealt with, is through risk transfer. So this is where cyber insurance comes into play. The challenge is, over the last 5 years, people have used insurance to fill that people, talent, and process gap, and to some extent that tooling gap. And so insurance has been covering too much risk, and they have been burned, the insurance industry have been burned by paying out so much that they're upside down on their premiums, and now you see rate coverage going down, you see rates going up, and you see the insurance company coming to you guys saying, here's more controls, put this in place, mitigate our risk that you're farming out to us, right? And so insurance companies are getting more involved in dictating to their clients what security things they will actually put in place to control their risks. So they have an important role in all of this that we need to acknowledge. By the way, piece of advice I'd like to give you today, if you're on the business side, if you're CFO, finance, go talk to your IT team. If you're in IT, go talk to your finance or CFO. Why? It's the finance office that negotiates the policies. And a lot of times what I've seen is they will agree with the insurer, the carrier, hey, can you put these controls in place? And they go, yeah, sounds good. Can you get those in place in the next 30 days? Yeah, sounds good. And then they pitch it over to the IT people, and the IT people go, what did we just agree to? Like, we got to do what in how many days? So the point is, go have a conversation where I've talked to customers, IT people in particular, have said to the CFO, look, I want to help consult with you on our renewal. It's always led to goodness. So there's one key takeaway as well. Go do that. Make that phone call this afternoon or tomorrow. You'll probably be glad that you did. So we want to look at risk as well. The big gap that I'm going to focus on throughout this presentation is really that talent gap. Okay? All right. So I mentioned there are two ways. I'm actually going to back up here for a second. I mentioned there are two categories really that we're going to focus on for this presentation. So we're going to go through those right now. So there are two categories, and then we'll get into specific examples and details of those two categories. So this is a pie chart, obviously. There are two items on it. We're going to walk through this here, and it's going to get more complex and build out here as we go. But what I'm talking to here is what we refer to as root point of compromise. So now I'm going to talk to you about how threat actors are actually breaking into environments and deploying ransomware and doing business email compromise and those types of things. This isn't theoretical stuff. This is real stuff. Okay? Now, I'm summarizing here on this slide over 1,000 incident response cases from last year alone in this pie chart, okay? Now, of those 1,000 incidences where customers were actually breached by a threat actor, the breach occurred in one of these two categories. Now, some of you, if you're in security, you're probably looking at these two going, duh, that's obvious, right? External exposure and user action. Can you get more specific? Yes, we will get more specific. But these are the two major categories, and so if you're going to focus on anything at all, I would focus on these two categories. Now, Tim, can you give me some specific examples within these categories? Yes, let's go a layer deeper. Okay? So now I want you to look at the outer ring, a lot here to take in, so let's walk through this step by step. We're going to start around the 1 o'clock. So we're going to focus on the blue for a second, okay? The outer ring of the blue. Top right or around the 1 o'clock, if you're looking at a clock, if you can read that, it says misconfiguration. Misconfiguration accounted for, so what's an example of misconfiguration? Well, I'm going to use an example of like a cloud misconfiguration. So for example, you have a standard way that you deploy operating systems and applications maybe within your data center, and you want to now deploy that operating system in the cloud, but there's a slightly different set of tooling, and so you accidentally misconfigure that deployment of that server as an example. Or a really basic example, you're deploying a storage bucket in Amazon, in AWS, S3 specifically, and you accidentally or temporarily, you set it up as public, meaning everybody can access it, and you forget to restrict permissions on that over time. That's an example of misconfiguration, okay? Now that's a small portion, so that's the good news there. It's a small portion, but still an important portion. Next is remote access hijack. So if we look at that roughly, about 9:30, 10 o'clock, up to about 1 o'clock, remote access hijack. So think like I have RDP running on an external facing server, an internet facing server. Maybe I turned it on temporarily because it's Friday afternoon. I had to make a change to it. I'm trying to get out of town because I'm taking my family out of town to go see Grandpa and Grandma. And I turn on remote access and I forget to turn it off. Right? And so a threat actor is able to exploit that. So that's an example. That's just one example of remote access hijack. Down below, the really big one is software exploit. This accounts for 43%. So this does include 0 days, but the vast majority of these, like almost 98% of these, are actually known vulnerabilities for which a patch exists and just hasn't been applied yet. Patch management. Really, really simple, incredibly difficult to do in actual practice, okay? This is where a lot of the attacks, the actual attacks that are successful, are taking place. Okay, let's move over to the orange section, user action. Lots of different categories here. By the way, this pie has gotten bigger over the last 3, 4, 5 years, but the fastest growing percentage of these two, external exposure, user action is the fastest growing. We've been tracking this data for a number of years now. Last year, I think it was like 21% was user action, and the year before it was in the like 18% or something like that. It is now up to 29%. Humans are really easy, unfortunately, to trick. And so this is one of the fastest growing attack surfaces. All right, let's break this down here a little bit. Bottom kind of right-hand side around the 5 o'clock position, we have drive-by attacks. So this is really simple. I take a USB drive, I put malware on it, I walk into a company's front office, I drop it on a coffee table, and I walk out hoping that somebody plugs that in. That's actually, good news is that's kind of a shrinking, but it still exists. Percentage. Social engineering and phishing, while they're separate, we can kind of lump these together a little bit. If you guys have read about like the MGM breach that took place, which is now running close to, I think, over $100 million in losses and expenses that they have incurred, that all started with social engineering. A call into, I think it was a help desk technician of all people, in which they social engineered that individual. That gave them the initial root point of compromise, and of course then they worked their way throughout the environment from there. Phishing emails, I think everybody kind of knows what those are these days, which is actually a good thing. The more awareness we have around that, don't click on links that you don't know what they are, you're not 100% certain, right? Hover over them. Is this going where I think it should be going? From a URL perspective, just do that extra level of validation. And then, of course, historic compromise. This is things like a user in your organization is reusing a password they use for their home Gmail account or some other website. They reuse that same password. That password gets compromised via another website and now puts your organization at risk. Now, these are not comprehensive. I'm just giving you examples from each one of these categories, but these are the two major categories, okay? So what do we do about this? Actually, before we do, I mentioned, so where did all this information come from? It came from us, Arctic Wolf. So one of the services, we essentially have 4 services that we offer as an organization. One of those services is incident response. And what I mean by incident response is this. An organization gets breached with ransomware, business email compromise, something like that, to the point where it's significant enough that their business is shut down, their business is significantly hampered, and or they need to reach out to the authorities, FBI, local police department, and or they're reaching out to their insurance company to make a claim, and they're bringing in a third-party firm like Arctic Wolf to do full forensics, threat actor negotiations, recovery, those types of things. So it is a service that we offer as a company. And so we learn a lot from that. Last year alone, as I mentioned, we did about 1,000, a little over 1,000 incident response cases. Unfortunately, this isn't a business we love to do because it means bad things are happening to good people. But it is a service that we offer to help our customers get recovered. But anyway, we take a lot of what we learn from that and we pour it into what we refer to as a threat report. If you go to arcticwolf.com, search for threat report, you'll see that pie chart, along with lots and lots and lots of additional data that we simply don't have time to go through today. But it is a really interesting read, and I'm trying to summarize a lot of that for you guys here today. So that's where that data came from. Is that all incidences and all breaches everywhere in the world? No, it's not. Again, it's a small representation of those, but again, really, really important things that we can learn from those. So now we know what the problem is. We know how the attackers are getting in. It's these things right here, right? Put into those two basic categories. So now what can we do about these things? That's really what we're after. And again, I want you to focus on, like, there's, again, thousands of things that you could be doing, but if I ran an organization, I was in charge of security, I would focus on what's being the most effective with threat actors, and I would focus on those things first, right? It's kind of like if you're a football fan, right? I love football, I love the NFL. Each NFL team, right, there are thousands of offensive plays that the defense could face, right? But the reality is they focus on who am I playing this week, right? So if you're a fan of the Vikings, I am, unfortunately, sometimes fortunately. Who did they just play? Atlanta Falcons. I forget who's coming up this week. So last week, obviously, the defense built their defense around the Atlanta Falcons. They didn't build their defense around Kansas City. They didn't build their defense around San Diego Chargers because they weren't playing them that week. They focused on what does Atlanta do really, really well, and that's what we're going to focus on, and that's ultimately the point of the presentation here, is let's focus on what you're likely to face, and this is what we're seeing kind of in the wild in terms of what's actually occurring. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to resolve some of this stuff. All right, so I'm going to keep coming back to this, and we're going to break down some of these categories in terms of what you can do. And now what I want to do is I want to start mapping this to some of the services that we offer so that I can show you how we can help. Now, there are certainly things that you can do on your own. We already talked about one of them, software exploits, patch management. Right? That is a really, really important one. Those are things that you can start doing today and getting more effective. It's a difficult one to tackle, obviously, but there are things that you can start doing today in that area. So on the right-hand side, so again, we're going to have a slide that kind of builds out here, so I'm going to walk you through it, kind of guide you through the process. On the right-hand side are the 4 services that Arctic Wolf offers. We already talked about one of them, which is on the far right-hand side, which is incident response. I hope none of you ever need this service from Arctic Wolf because it means you've been breached, okay? But it is a service that we offer, so if you do need it, we're here, we're very, very responsive. We can usually respond within a handful of hours. So that is the far right-hand service, but the 3 left-hand services, starting with managed detection and response, managed risk, managed security awareness. We'll talk about these in a bit more detail here in some following slides. Right now, I'm simply going to refer to them. So if I were to categorize, by the way, these 4 services, the 3 on the left are what we refer to as left of boom. Boom is something bad happening. And the 3 services on the left are designed to protect you against something bad from happening. And then the service on the right, incident response, is after something bad has potentially happened, how do we recover and how do we restore for that? Okay? All right, so let's talk about software exploits because that was the biggest chunk of that pie, right? Software exploits. So what can be done to mitigate those? Again, good patch management. What does good look like? How can Arctic Wolf help me out in that process? Let's talk about that here in a little bit. So if we look at Arctic Wolf's managed risk, that is the second hexagon on the right. Arctic Wolf's managed risk offering helps prioritize and contextualize important updates. What does that mean? Okay, so a lot of this comes around vulnerability management. What vulnerabilities do I have in my environment and how critical or important are they? And then I'm going to add another piece, which is how critical and important are they to your organization? I'm going to give a really simple, almost silly example to prove a point here. Okay, let's say that you have an operating system running in your environment that has a critical vulnerability. Now let's imagine for a second, now most vulnerability management tools are going to say, that is critical, you need to address it right now. Now let's put some context around it. Let's say that operating system is running on one laptop. Let's say that laptop is in a dev test environment, that is network segmented off from the rest of your network. It has no access to the internet whatsoever, and it does not run any critical or even really important business functions. Here's the question. Is that a critical vulnerability? To the OS, it's critical. To you as a business, is it critical? I would say no, it's not. Context is important. Most vulnerability management tools are going to say, look, in the context of this little isolated world, this is really, really important. Therefore, it demands your time and attention, right? This is where Arctic Wolf comes in. Part of how we deliver our service is through what we call a concierge delivery team. These are people that are named to your environment. They get to know you and get to know your environment. Why is that important? Because they can understand context. They can understand the industry that you're in. They can understand the vertical that you're in. They can understand how your network is configured. They get to know you, your business processes, which applications are important, which applications are less important. And they can help contextualize vulnerabilities to help put you on the right path to say, look, if I've got 5 hours this week to do patch management, I don't have full 40 hours, but I got 5 hours this week that I can go work on it. Which vulnerabilities, which level of effort is going to give me the biggest return? And this is where we come in and we start coaching and helping you through that process. Remember I said, what's the biggest gap in the effectiveness gap? It's that talent, it's that human expertise. That is part of what we're providing and helping our customers out mitigate a lot of these things. We do things like port monitoring, OAuth top 10 scanning. And this is not a comprehensive presentation, by the way, of all of our services. I'm just trying to simply map a few key attributes to some of these ways in which threat actors are actually getting into environments. So with that, we're going to move on. Remote access hijack. So we talked about 25% were caused by IT practices such as RDP. On an external internet-facing server or something like that. Again, just one example. So we're going to talk about what Arctic Wolf services can help out with that. Well, our managed detection and response service can help out with that, along with others as well, but we're going to focus on that for a second. So part of what we do is we log everything that's going on, or you guys are actually logging everything that's going on in your environment. We're ingesting those logs and we're monitoring those logs. And so what we do is we monitor that 24/7. So if we see somebody coming into your environment that shouldn't be coming into your environment at 2 o'clock in the morning from an IP address that is in no way related to any of you or your employees, one of the things that we will do is we'll detect it, we'll see that, we'll shut it down. We'll actually do containment, either through the network or through an agent or something like that, or the endpoint tool. We can do containment, shut that down, and then of course what we can do then is after the fact, we'll reach out to you and say, hey, here's what happened, here's what we did, here's how we stopped it. Now let's figure out how do we put some policy and process in place to make sure this doesn't happen again, right? We do attack surface monitoring, so this also kind of applies to that misconfiguration we talked about a little bit as well, around AWS misconfigurations as an example. So we do attack surface monitoring proactively. So the MDR service and managed risk are not just reactive services, meaning we're monitoring for a threat actor coming in. We're also proactively scanning through your environment looking for, hey, there's an open door, there's an open window here. Maybe we should shut that down before somebody even attempts to walk in through that front door or that window. All right, remember the wheel? Keep coming back to this. Let's talk about some of these user action things. So historic compromise. Part of what we do is we do dark web monitoring. So I gave the example of one of your employees that had their home password compromised, but they reuse that password in your environment. And by the way, the threat actors largely know the usernames and the mail addresses. It's usually first name dot last name at domain. Right, so guessing that's super simple. Now we just need a password. Well, if I have that password, it's really, really simple. Part of our service is we do dark web monitoring, dark web scanning, looking for your users or your domain that shows up in the dark web so we can hopefully make some changes in your environment to secure it as well as clean some of that up, as well as just what we refer to as managed awareness or security training. So one of the services that we offer is security awareness training for your employees, for you and your employees, quite frankly. And what we do there is we have these short little videos that we deploy every couple of weeks or so that train your employees to look for this kind of stuff, to have good password hygiene, to know how to look at an email and determine if this is potentially phishing or not. So we deploy that training, we manage that training for you. Again, it's another service that we offer. And those types of things can help educate your users, your end users, to make sure that they're not doing things that they shouldn't be doing or doing dumb things, right? So trying to bring the education and knowledge of the entire employee base up is what's going to help fill this gap as well, right? Okay. Phishing emails, one of the fastest growing attack methods. So again, managed security awareness training. A lot of our training videos are focused, not exclusively on this, but very much focused on phishing campaigns. We have phishing buttons that you can push, right? So if somebody actually sees something that looks suspicious, there's a button they can press right in Outlook and actually send that to the IT group or send that to Arctic Wolf to say, hey, can you look into this? As well as managed detection and response. So if somebody does accidentally click on a link and now there's a threat actor in the environment, part of what our MDR service will do is again, look for that attacker, look for lateral movement, try to contain that and shut that down as quickly as possible so they can do the least amount of damage possible. We do this for O365, on-premise Exchange, Google Workspace, as well as we do things like MFA monitoring. If you guys have, hopefully you guys all have MFA implemented as broadly as possible, as opposed to just we put it on a couple of servers because insurance told us to do it. That goes back to there's implementing a tool and then there's implementing a tool well so that it does what it's supposed to do effectively. And then there's actually, so this is actually a new announcement. So within the last, actually November 1st, it became official. So a few days ago, we acquired a company called Revelstoke, which gives us SOAR capabilities. So if you don't know what SOAR is, it really is an automation platform that we're going to build into our service that allows us to take more and faster remediation steps because it's all about time. If you see something bad going on in the environment, the faster you can detect it, the faster you can shut it down, the least amount of damage that a threat actor can actually do in your environment. So we're building some automation in here as well to really kind of ease our staff a little bit, but be more responsive to our customers as well. All right, social engineering, that's another one we talked about. Again, managed detection and response for detection and containment, and our managed awareness training as well can help prevent a lot of these things by educating your end users around what does a social engineering attack look like, and how to avoid those types of things as well. So again, not a comprehensive explanation of all of our services, but really just trying to map them to how they can solve some of these ways in which threat actors are actually getting into environments. So how does Arctic Wolf do all of this? Well, we're going to talk through, and again, another build slide, so I'm going to talk you through, and we're going to walk through this process here very, very shortly. So at the bottom here of the slide, what we have are a lot of different things. So if you can read this, or maybe you can't read this, on the bottom left-hand side, you have endpoints, network, cloud, identity solutions, and of course, people, right? These are just some of the IT things that make up your environment, okay? And so you have different vendors and different tools and different products and processes that you've implemented around those. So how our service works is we take the logs from all of these different things, and we upload those logs, and we don't care what those things are, right? So we don't care what your endpoint tool is. We don't care what your server OS is. We don't care what your identity access management solution is, what cloud providers and SaaS providers you're using. We basically take the logs from those systems and we ingest those into what we refer to as the Arctic Wolf platform. This is a cloud-based instance. We own it, we run it, we manage it, we maintain it. There's nothing you have to do other than point your log sources to this cloud. This is where we ingest. We do things like parsing, enriching, we run analytics. There's different forms of machine learning that are running in here as well. And then what we're doing is we're monitoring your environment for suspicious things, bad best practices or best practice violations, I should say, things that you shouldn't be doing or bad things that are actually happening in your environment. We try to weed out that noise from the thousands of good things that are happening every day, looking for that one thing that looks suspicious, weird, or inconsistent, or violates policy, those types of things. And from there, we funnel that into what we call our concierge delivery model. So the way that you interact with Arctic Wolf and the way that we interact with you primarily is through human interaction. Email, phone calls. We do have a dashboard. We do have a portal that you log into. We do have a ticketing system just to keep track of everything. But primarily how you will interact with Arctic Wolf is by talking to another person. I mentioned that concierge team. It is 2 to 3 individuals that are named to your environment. You get to know them by name. You have their email address. You have their contact information. They know how to get a hold of you. And that's how we deliver our services, right? Because a lot of times what we've found is a tool will throw up an alert. Right, you guys might even have some kind of tool in your environment that throws up alerts all the time, and you look at those and you go, I don't really know what that means. There's an explanation, but I don't truly understand what that means and what I'm supposed to go do about it. That's one of the biggest problems we see when it comes to that effectiveness gap, is having people that are well trained that understand, oh, when I see that alert, I know that's just noise. It's actually not that big a deal. We can close that out. Versus somebody can look at that and say, okay, that one plus that one plus that one look really, really suspicious, right? So having experts that see thousands of different environments, which is what we have. We have hundreds of individuals that sit in our triage and our concierge group that pour through these logs on your behalf, saying, okay, what's real and what's not, and what actually needs to be done. And then on top of that, we have our 4 services that layer on top of all of this as well. So managed detection and response is essentially that monitoring 24/7 over your environment, ingesting those logs, looking for bad things that are happening. And then we do the alert, we ingest the alerting, we look at the alerts, we triage it, we hunt it down, we do an investigation. We figure out, is this something actually worth bothering you guys about? And if it reaches a certain threshold, we go, yeah, this doesn't look good. Now is the time that we get on the phone and we call you or we shoot you an email. We have this whole escalation process that we customize to each customer to figure out, when do you want to be called, how do we contact you, and about what do we contact you about. But the idea is we come to you with very, very little, unless it's really, really important, so that when we do call, when we do email, you pay attention. Otherwise, we're trying to suppress as much of that noise as possible on your behalf because we're doing the investigations for you. So that's primarily what managed detection and response is. Managed risk is really a lot about vulnerability management. We've kind of touched on that a little bit. So this is our team going through, scanning your environment, looking for holes, looking for ways in which threat actors could get into your environment, and then helping you prioritize what is most important in the context of your environment, your industry, your network, and your people and process. And then we talked a little bit about the managed security awareness training. This is our team building security awareness training videos. So we build our own content, we create our own content. On average, they're about 2 to 3 minutes in length. What we found is if you give somebody a video more than 3 minutes, guess what happens after 3 minutes? Right? So why send them anything that's longer than 3 minutes? So what we do is we tend to send videos quite frequently, but no more than 3 minutes in length, because we can maintain attention. If we can maintain attention, we can improve effectiveness. So don't think of this as training as much as a lot of what we're trying to do through these videos is behavior modification. It doesn't matter if your employees are all trained and they still click on phishing links. You can have a report that says everybody went through the training, they have a little certificate, they put it up in their cubicle wall, I've been certified, but they're still clicking on links. If their behavior hasn't changed, we failed, right? So a lot of this is really focused on how do we change the behavior of the user, how do we educate them, make them aware, and modify their behavior as opposed to simply training them. And then again, last but not least, again, the one service I hope you guys never, ever actually have to use from Arctic Wolf is incident response. This means that something bad has happened in your environment. Though we have a team of experts, hundreds to be precise, of experts that can jump in and respond very, very quickly. So again, I hope you don't ever need this service, but it is absolutely there if you need it. So these are our core services. These are the 4 core services. This is what we do. We do it extremely well. I believe we are around 5,000 customers today. We have just in North America alone, we have 4 SOCs with a 5th about to open in Orlando. So it's Minneapolis, Utah, San Antonio, Texas, Toronto, with Orlando about to open up soon. We have hundreds and hundreds of security analysts and security experts and security specialists that staff those 24/7, watching over our customers' environments and protecting them. But then we do like quarterly and monthly meetings with our customers as well. That's where the concierge come in. We do quarterly and monthly meetings where we're working to educate you, train you. We're doing a lot of work scanning your environment, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for ways in which we can improve your security posture. And then they work with you to figure out how to get those things implemented so that your security posture continues to go up, your level of knowledge continues to go up, and most importantly, we're keeping your company secure. And with that, I'm about out of time, a little ahead of schedule. So I'm not sure if there's any questions from the audience, either in the room or online. Otherwise, we can break early if there are no questions. No questions. Any questions online to address? All right. Well, hopefully that means I answered all your questions. Come by the booth. We're literally right on the other side of this wall. Come say hi to us if you're interested in talking more about Arctic Wolf. With that, thank you very much for your time and your attention. Enjoy the rest of your day.